Let's talk about hedge fund long ideas. And so I love using these templates. And again, I don't like teaching theory, so I'm going to show you real life practical stuff. So here's a bunch of ideas I created years ago, and you can see the date in the top right-hand corner. And I want to give you a couple different types of ideas here, right? And so this was a hedge fund long idea that I did well on. It was eBay. And the thesis here was not technicals at all, so there's no technicals. It was about the long-term valuation thesis. And so at that time, I realized that if PayPal was a separately traded company, the value of PayPal plus eBay would be higher separately than together. And so the way to unlock shareholder value was to have PayPal spun off. I wasn't involved in getting them to spin that off, but activist investors were. And that one worked out well. In terms of other ideas, here's Citrix. We already talked about it. And so I want you to always think top down and then bottoms up, right? And so you could think top down that cloud computing is going to matter for the next couple decades, which I believe, right? And then bottoms up, you'll pick a bunch of winners based on that. And this is a nice recap of fundamentals, technicals, valuation, and catalysts as well. Next up, we've got Verizon. This one's a little bit different. This is kind of for more value-focused hedge funds, because at that point with Verizon, they had a high dividend yield, right? So there's good value there, right? But it was a big, sleepy old company that's not going to move too much in the long run. All right, and then there's Apple. Don't ever pitch Apple in an interview, please, because everybody does this, and so I want you to think different. Okay, next up we've got Baidu, and this was a cool one because Google decided to pull out of China years ago, or I think it was back in early 2010. That's right. And I owned Baidu then because it was a share shift idea, commensurate with what we talked about with Best Buy versus Circuit City, or Google versus New York Times, or Apple versus Microsoft, right? A share shift one. But here I was just long Baidu. I wasn't short Google because I thought Google's a great company. All right, next up we have EMC, and this was a secular growth investment at the time for me, and I've been in EMC for ages. I don't own it obviously anymore, but EMC is a storage company. And I thought, well, in 5 years, people are going to have more storage on the internet than they have today, right? So at that time, that's what I was thinking. Next up, we got Mead Johnson, we talked a little bit about China. And so Mead Johnson sells baby food. And so when people move from the up to the middle class and move into cities, one thing they do is they buy more higher end baby products, right? And that's totally counter-cyclical, of course, because it's your children. And so Mead Johnson was a share shift game or investment, I should say, in China at the time. All right, cool. And I want to end this section, right, or this lecture with a discussion of NetSuite, okay? And so remember, investment themes last longer than you think. And the thematic approach for me investing in NetSuite was based on the long-term viability of cloud computing. So top down, I looked at cloud computing years ago and I thought, hey, this makes sense. 5 years from now, we'll be using more computer-based storage than local-based storage, right? And so you say, well, so what? Well, when it came to NetSuite, the way I looked at it at the time was as follows. SAP is a huge German software company, right? And they're very good at old school client-server software, right? It's not their fault. It's just who they are. Very big, successful, great company. Very good. And so SAP is kind of like Microsoft Office for the whole company. So instead of having Word, Excel, PowerPoint, SAP has HR, right? HR as an application, financials as an application, industrial, procurement, sales, Salesforce stuff as applications, right? $80 billion market cap at the time. And then you had Salesforce, which basically did one thing that SAP did, right? But in the cloud, and that was Salesforce stuff. Well, years ago when I looked at NetSuite, I thought, well, NetSuite does everything SAP does, like all those apps, including sales, everything, in the cloud. Why can't this company, NetSuite, one day trade at a market cap close to Salesforce? And Salesforce's market cap at the time, I think, was $20 billion. Now it's closer to 50, right? And so it's that type of logic that gives you outsized, amazing returns on ideas. And remember, every single portfolio every year comes down to 1 or 2 stocks, and everything else is just noise. So make sure those stocks that help you to generate positive returns are the ones that have amazing long-term secular growth potential, like cloud computing.